As we begin, we get a chance to talk a little baseball with our guy, Jaffe from Fangraphs.com. You can also follow Jay on Twitter at J_Jaffe. And again, he's been busy, especially these last couple of months with all of his Hall of Fame work. And it culminates with the news earlier this week that Big Papi, David Ortiz, the lone inductee from the voting group of this year's class of 2022 for the Baseball Hall of Fame. Jay, good to have you back. And man, I'm sure for you it has been busy. You've been on MLB Network. You've done the circuit. I know you also were doing podcasts. And hey, it's what you live for. This is what it's all about. How surprised were you when we got the results and found out that Ortiz was going to be the only person this year that would be part of the class? He'll join others that were, I guess, inducted months earlier, but for this group, the only one.
Yeah, I wasn't very surprised in the end because the top projectionist, a guy named Jason Sardell, who's now projected the last four Hall of Fame elections better than anybody else out there, had Ortiz at a 98 or 98% chance of election based on the ballots that have been published in the ballot tracker. But if you'd asked me a year ago, I would have said it's maybe about 50-50 that he would get in this year. Figured Ortiz was going to get in, but it could take 2 or 3 years given the baggage that his candidacy carries with regards to performance-enhancing drugs and the designated hitter factor.
I'm with you on that one. And that's why, to me, it blew me away that with the baggage you mentioned, he was a first ballot Hall of Famer. I mean, that's the one thing to really point out on this. This was his first year on the ballot. He had a reputation of being very good to the media. Just that that fun guy and nice and kind. And sometimes I really think that matters when you start to weigh a candidate. It shouldn't maybe, but I think in this particular case, it might have helped Ortiz.
Look, it probably didn't hurt his cause, but I think the bigger factor, performance-enhancing drugs have derailed just about every other candidate who has a paper trail based on what they've done. Ortiz, in his situation, Commissioner Rob Manfred during Ortiz's retirement tour went out of his way to explain that the report of his positive on a survey test in 2003, which came out in 2009 from the New York Times, said there were a certain number of cases that would have been arbitrated. His was among them. It may have been caused by a substance that was legal at the time and available over the counter. Manfred never went out of his way to say the same thing for Sammy Sosa, whose only known infraction is that same survey test, as reported by the New York Times. So I think that was significant. Even Tom Verducci, who's about as hardline as they come when it comes to not supporting PED-linked candidates, included Ortiz on his ballot this year. I think that tells you, the relative weight that voters gave it.
I get it. I just think it bothered me because in the sense of what this is and really the era that they're playing in, and given some of the other recent Hall of Famers that, although they might never have been suspended for it, still there were rumors surrounding Jeff Bagwell, Mike Piazza, Ivan Pudge Rodriguez, like there were some others. And yet, we know about Bonds, we know about Clemens. It was their last year. And it just didn't seem right that because you're letting some in, but you're not letting others in, Jay.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. It's very selective in ways that I think I'm disappointed. I've had Bonds and Clemens on my virtual and actual ballots, the last two of them being ones that I was able to cast in the election every year of their candidacies, and like you said, those two were not suspended by Major League Baseball. Their infractions date to a time before Major League Baseball had any kind of enforcement mechanism for its rules. It's a very selective reasoning that I think has something to do with the personalities involved. That, as I called it, logical gerrymandering. That put Ortiz on one side and Bonds and Clemens on the other. I believe it was Jason Stark had a stat that 62% of voters who did not have Bonds and Clemens on their ballots did include Ortiz.
I know, which is crazy.
So, it is crazy.
I hear you. We're with Jay Jaffe right now. We're talking about the Hall of Fame. Now, you've been writing a lot about this on Fangraphs this whole offseason, but really talking about this week's events in your recent columns. And there is now these different committees that are formed to weigh ball players and other contributors from the last 100+ years. And we now have the Today's Game, which could ultimately later this year include guys like Bonds and Clemens and Sosa and Schilling and Fred McGriff and who knows who else, which is also going to be really interesting, Jay, to see how soon Bonds and Clemens get on that Today's Game committee.
Yeah, it's so they're eligible this year. There should have been a 1-year break, but the postponement of last year's era committee proceedings due to the coronavirus pandemic shifted the timeline a bit. So now all four of those guys who fell off the ballot, Bonds, Clemens, Sosa, and Schilling, are eligible this year for inclusion. It would be unprecedented in the history of era committees, at the very least, for those three besides Sosa to not get on the ballot, given that they all polled at least above 60% in recent years. You'd have to go back. I think 1994 is one that we're questioning as far as veterans committees. So you have to go back a long ways, comparatively speaking, to find a situation where a candidate who got at least 60% wasn't immediately included on the next committee ballot. It remains to be seen whether the hall will do something to try to intercede, which I think would be visible, very conspicuous and draw some outrage, and rightly so. But yeah, we'll be talking about these guys again. This is not the end of the story. It could still be a very long time before they're elected, because the Hall of Fame, gets to choose who sits on those committees, and there's a lot of political intrigue involved. But we're going to be talking about these guys' candidacies for a good long time. And if you thought the PED issue was leaving the ballot, the writer's ballot, well, we've got Alex Rodriguez for another 9 years, based on the fact that he got something like 34% this year. Which
is so low, but it just goes to show you, unlike some of the others that we've talked about, Rodriguez was actually suspended for PEDs after baseball started their policy.
Yeah, we've seen Rodriguez and Manny Ramirez both lag in terms of the percentages that they've received, because they do have the suspensions. Ramirez has been between 28 and 29% in each of the last three cycles.
Absolutely. And as far as Sammy Sosa goes, I said this on the show earlier in the week, Jay. In 1998, Sammy Sosa, along with Mark McGwire, really helped save baseball, helped put it back on the map with their home run race of 98, when they were both chasing Maris. And you think about Sosa's popularity in Chicago and an era where he really did dominate as one of the most feared hitters of the game. It almost seems like you're taking his whole body of work and just throwing it aside and saying, well, this really shouldn't count because he did things that ultimately wouldn't have mattered had he not allegedly taken something to enhance his physical stature. And that's the hardest part about it, when you start to look at, hey, you still got to hit a baseball. You got to be able to drive it, whether you drive it 450 feet or 385 feet. Sometimes you still look at that and still say, well, do you take somebody who helped save the game 25 years ago and just throw him aside like he doesn't matter at all?
Yeah, Mark McGwire got the same treatment too. I mean, he aged off the ballot without ever coming close to election. I think 23% was about as high as he pulled. Baseball didn't. I have yet to see a single owner give back any of the money that they made during the home run surge of the 1990s that was fueled by these big jacked up sluggers. So there's a hypocrisy in the way that they've cast those guys aside, whether or not they did performance enhancing drugs.
Are there too many voters in the Baseball Writers Association of America, in your opinion?
I think an electorate of 400 is fine. I mean, I like that process a lot more than I like the era committee process, where you've got just 16 and you've got situations where you might have two former teammates and a former manager of a guy sitting on that committee and voting. There is a wide spectrum of viewpoints. You have to get about 300 voters to vote for you in order to get to the Hall of Fame. There has to be a very wide consensus, and it should be difficult, and it is.
I wonder, now in terms of the era committees, are there some individuals voting in that 16 member group that are not in the Hall of Fame, or are they all Hall of Famers in some capacity?
Generally, the breakdown is 8 Hall of Famers, including managers, 4 executives, and 4 writers and historians. You might have a little bit of a blur in the distinctions there. You might have a Hall of Famer who's also an executive sitting in on it. There's occasionally a last minute substitution if somebody's travel plans fall through. There's a bit of intrigue and politics there.
What's also really interesting is you can only vote for a maximum of 4. And I think that really changes the game, because when you have a large pool of candidates and you can only put 4 on the list, sometimes there's just not enough votes to go around to get on 12 of those 16 members.
Yeah, the math is very hard. I mean, when we saw on the Golden Days committee, we saw 4 candidates elected and then Dick Allen fall 1 vote short. I mean, that's just about a mathematical impossibility. Because there's only 64 votes in that room total, and we've accounted for at least 59 of them or something like that via those 5 results. So not a lot of margin for error for anybody else.
Next year, there really isn't anybody on the list that just jumps out at you as someone that's going to get a large percentage of the vote. Would you agree?
Well, I think Carlos Beltran, had he not been involved in the Houston Astros sign stealing scandal, would have been a strong candidate for election, maybe even first ballot election. He's a guy who's 9th in my JAWS system among center fielders. Great power speed combo with quality defense. Played a good chunk of his career in New York, and was on a lot of very, very good teams. Had monster postseason numbers. But that's right now overshadowed by the fact that he has been identified as one of the key players in the sign stealing scandal, and he lost his job as a Mets manager and may not ever get another shot to manage a team. And so, the picture has really changed for him here post retirement.
If you would like to read more about any of the Hall of Famers that we've been discussing today, you can do it one of 2 ways. Either go to Fangraphs.com, because Jay's got terrific write-ups, or I also recommend pick up a copy of the Cooperstown Casebook. It's a few years old now, but Jay's written everybody on there, and a lot of the names we've discussed here, including Big Papi, all profiled in the Casebook, and that's available at Amazon.com. All right, let's go ahead, wrap it up. Beer pick of the week. What would you like to profile for us as we head into the weekend, Jay?
All right. Well, usually, as traditionally, I have turned to Stone Arrogant Bastard for my post-election results beer. That's become harder to find in my neck of the woods. So I went with a local favorite here. This is Threes Brewing's Logical Conclusion. It has a thumbs up and a thumbs down, which I thought was appropriate for the election results day. Because there were some good and bad news. It's a hazy IPA with 7% ABV. For my tasting notes, it's got notes of peach, mango, and citrus. Very smooth, easy drinking, really enjoyable beer.
Terrific stuff. Hey, listen, we'll look forward to picking it back up with you next week. Thanks as always for the time and joining us and giving us some good Hall of Fame narrative, Jay.
All right, sure thing, Steve. Take care.